Hi, this is Ron Karr, the author of The Velocity Mindset: How Leaders Eliminate Resistance, Gain Buy-in, and Achieve Better Results Faster. The best advice I ever received was that everything in life is basically a story. And if you wrote that story, you have the power to change it.
Welcome to the Inside Sales Show hosted by Phil Gerbershak. Each episode will take you Welcome to the Inside Sales Show hosted by Phil Gerbershak. Each episode will take you behind the scenes with a sales expert or a sales practitioner and go inside the nuances you need to be successful today in sales and sales leadership. We'll have conversations about the mindset, skill set, and tool set of highly successful sales professionals, offer insights into prospecting, qualifying, following up, closing sales for inside sales professionals, and hiring, firing, motivation, and rewarding your team for inside sales leaders. And we will find out what's working and what's not working for inside sales pros right now. And now, here's your host of the Inside Sales Show, sales speaker, sales trainer, and pinball wizard, Phil Gerbershak.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm so excited to be here with Ron Karr, the author of The Velocity Mindset. This is going to be a great conversation. Thanks so much for tuning in. And Ron, congrats on a great book, man. Good stuff.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, it's been a little while, so why did you write this book, man? This seems like the timely, perfect book for right now, but what propelled you to write this?
Well, as you know, after I was done with the presidency of the National Speakers Association in 2014, I had 9 surgeries, most of them on my back. And while I was having my back fused, I was basically out of the speaking circuit for 2 years. And when I was laying there in bed, on pain pills, and I was looking at my life, I started realizing, hey, I'm 60. Look at what I accomplished. I accomplished a lot, but I realized I missed a few things I really wanted to accomplish. And when I started thinking about why that was, I realized it was my fears that prevented me from doing those things. It was the stories that I was telling myself. And as we know, as we get older, life gets shorter. So, if you haven't done it yet, you better do it real quick. So that started letting me realize about the concept of velocity. We all don't want to miss out on moments in life. And then the other thing is I realized that velocity, Phil, when you hear the word velocity, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Speed.
Exactly. And that's all people think velocity is, but it's not. And if that's all you think it is, then you get burnout because you're so busy doing task, and you're not even asking yourself if those tasks are going to help you get to where you want to be. The real definition of velocity, the physics definition, is speed with direction. And often, whether it's a sales call, whether it's a project or a life event or whatever, people are not dealing with the right direction because of their fears. And they let their fears get in the way of to what they think is possible.
Wow. So velocity is speed with direction, which I think is really powerful, right? That really changes the way that we think about that and the way that we frame really how we're going to talk today. Because one of the things that resonated most in your book was the piece where you talked about the Alice in Wonderland, right? Where you said they're going to a caucus show. So talk to me about that and how that's a great metaphor for how we're going to talk today about velocity.
Well, like Alice, when you're going on a journey, and sometimes you go down the yellow brick road, or you can be going around in circles. You're asking yourself, are you going in the right direction? And that really depends on what you want to accomplish. The biggest thing that came up for me was that, when people write down where they want to go, many times they have the fears get in the way. In other words, what comes up for them is what they think they can and can't accomplish based on their own biases and experiences of the past. But when you do that, all you do is recreate the past. So what you're really trying to do when you're trying to go down a road is you're trying to go down and get to a direction that you really want to get to, something that you're really passionate about. And the passion has to be about a destiny that you truly want to create, whether or not you think you can do it. In other words, what we tell people to do is start with a clean piece of paper and forget about your past biases and experiences. What do you truly want to create? Where do you want to go? And make sure that your tasks are strong enough to get there.
Wow. Wow, I really like that. That's such a more compelling story than, oh my gosh, I got to relive yesterday. I really dig that. So who was the first person? How did you get started kind of on this story, right? Who embedded that in you, or is that something that you discovered as you've progressed in your career in your life?
Well, apparently, so we're, Phil, you and I, we're used to making scissor reels, for our speaking business. And the last scissor reel that I made was the best one I ever had. And Chris West was the producer of it. And we were trying to rebrand myself, so I was coming out of those back surgeries. And I went down to the University of Texas to do a keynote, and he came and filmed me. And he called me the next day. He goes, "I got your brand, buddy." I go, "What is it?" He goes, "Velocity Mindset." So what are you talking about? He goes, "Dude, you speak about velocity all the time. I look at all your past footage. I look at your workbooks from the past. You're always using it." And when he said it, it just hit me like a bullet between the eyes because it was what I was passionate about because of what I just shared earlier. And I said, yes, I can get behind that. And I can get behind it for one reason. It's not a theory. I want to make a movement, Phil. Because think about this. What if everyone in the world acted like a leader and not a victim?
Yeah. Wow. That really would change the game, right? If we thought of ourselves as a leader instead of a victim, if we realize that we have the choice, we have the power, we have the potential to go where we want,
And we
we
all
would
do.
have a very different, yeah, right. Yeah, but we have to believe that, right? That's the
Exactly.
that's the big thing. So where do we gin that belief up, man? Is obviously, right, folks should get a copy of the book and read that, but where do we find that, right? In simple terms, how do we find that belief, that kind that velocity mindset? Where do we find that?
Well, first of all, you have to be able to take compliments. Most of us are very bad at taking compliments. When someone tells us he did a great job, they're saying, "Yeah, if only you knew." Uh, because we're not feeling good when someone gives us a compliment. But we really got to take it in, not because we're egotistical, but you really got to understand what people appreciate about yourself. So if you can allow that to happen, it'll sink in and start sticking with you for a while. But at the end of the day, you know what you're doing well. And you've got to allow yourself to go back and assess what you're doing well. The problem is most people concentrate on what they're doing wrong, and then they get depressed about it, or or they think that they're a fraud, or all the negative stories come in. The reality is we all do wrong things. Okay, we all make mistakes in life, but it's from those mistakes, if we learn from that, that's where we learn, and it leads to our next success.
Yeah. So focusing on what we're doing right, because we know we do some stuff right, and taking those negative times and turning them around. Wow. That's all we can hope, right? As a leader, as a business person, right? If we're in a relationship, right, as a significant other, that's all we can hope. We can't expect to be perfect, but we can hope to do more of what's right and less of what's wrong by focusing on the good stuff, right?
You use the word perfect. One of the things we talk about in the book is perfectionism and goodism, and these are two traits that Dr. John Sano, the late Dr. John Sano, discovered in his book Healing Back Pain, because he realized that most back pain was not really physical. It was coming because the mind was getting close to the feelings in our subconscious we didn't want to get to. So it created pain as a diversion. And the two traits that usually led to that was perfectionism, because when you deal with perfectionism, there's no end. You can keep going and going and going. And then goodism, where you're out there just for the good of other people without taking care of yourself. So yes, perfectionism and goodism are two things that can divert away from velocity in your life and leave you burned out again.
Wow, I've heard of perfectionism, but I haven't heard of goodism. Let's talk. Can we talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's an interesting concept. I've never heard that before. So take me through that, Ron. What's the story we play with goodism, and how does that impact us?
Well, we're combining two big things, story and goodism. But when I was young, my father was a Holocaust survivor, and it's documented that kids of Holocaust survivors usually have difficult upbringings. There's abuse, physical, not sexual, physical, and verbal, because they were so damaged from the war that they basically don't want that to happen to you. So they loved you very much, but the environment that they created was a very tough environment, let's say. For me, it led to stories like, "I'm a fraud, wait till your friends find out." But in terms of goodism, because I never got a compliment, or all I had was the intense criticism, I would always clean the dishes after dinner. I would always do whatever I can just to get the attaboy. That's goodism.
Mm.
All right. When you're
Mm-mm-mm.
trying to do something for somebody else, even at the expense of yourself.
Ooh. Wow. That is a big challenge. I mean, that's so interesting. That's almost altruism to an extreme, right?
Right.
Where it's not just for the greater good, but because we're damaging ourselves and hurting ourselves to do that. Wow.
But
That's
some of us
I,
do it because for us, that's the way that we get credibility. That's the way that we feel that we're accepted.
yeah. Wow. Wow, that's really interesting. I've not heard that before. I definitely have to do some
In
more research.
salespeople, by the way, in salespeople, when we do assessments, we're looking for different traits, and we look at the altruistic, where they care more about others than themselves. And if people we call it a social, so people with a high social, um, they in jewelry and design, that might work a little bit because they might be more into form versus function. But the reality is they'll probably discount the prices a lot more because they're trying to help people, even if it's to their own detriment.
Wow. Wow, that's so interesting how that shows up, right? If the first time that, if the first objection, if we're lowering price, perhaps we need to pause for a second and think, okay, well, why am I doing this? Like, am I just trying to please? Am I trying to, is this for credibility or why am I doing that? Wow, that's a
But
head scratcher, man.
but you can also change the story. You're not going to change the traits in you. We all have traits, but the thing is acknowledge when they don't serve you well. Anything that's a strength, if it's overused, becomes a weakness, right? So it's a good thing
Yep.
to be good to people, but that's when it's overused. So if all of a sudden you're a salesperson and the customer says, "Hey, you got to do better for me? I need help," and then all of a sudden the feeling comes, "I want to help this person." So then the first thing you do is, "Okay, let me give you a discount." But are you really helping that person? Because if you keep giving discounts, that means you don't have as much money as you can to support those customers. So you may have to cut corners. That's not really helping the customers.
Wow. Wow. That's such a big question, right? Are you really helping the other person with what you're doing?
Right.
Or are you just maybe doing the simplest thing or the least painful thing or the thing that you believe that has worked?
Well,
And yeah, I mean wow.
what you just said true because when people go through to the point of least resistance. So they'll cut costs immediately, but most of the time they find that's not enough.
Yeah.
Now what do they
Yeah, for
do?
sure. Yeah, wow. Wow, that's so interesting. That's so good. So all right, so I get it. I believe in the velocity mindset now. I understand what it is. I understand what we have to overcome. But how do we get buy-in? I mean, Ron, this is honestly, this is a very new concept to me, and I'm pretty well read. I've read a ton of sales books, a ton of mindset books. How do we get buy-in from our boss? Or if we're a boss, how do we get buy-in from our people so they can embrace this so that they can see that they have the power to change their stories?
So let's do buy-in for anybody in life. Okay, how to get buy-in from anybody? And the real key thing we have to remember is the age-old adage: people do things for their reasons, not yours. Now, the other thing you have to understand is if you accept yourself as a salesperson as being a leader, then the first thing you have to do is control the environment of the person you want to influence, right? So
Yeah.
we need to understand that if I'm cold calling somebody or even calling an existing client, I'm an interruption. Now, you know what it's like to have your day interrupted, right?
Absolutely.
So we looked at neuroscience and we know that cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. So we know that in cortisol, you can't eliminate it. So too low a cortisol, you're not really engaged. At a 4 or 5, you're really engaged. But when it gets into the 7, 8, 9, 10, you start getting disengaged because you want to flee because something's not right. Well, most people, when we do this on stage, when they get interrupted with a phone call, we ask them, what's your cortisol level? And they usually say it's at a 7. So you're already starting off behind the 8 ball, right? You got
Yep.
someone who's already aggravated. What most salespeople do then is they make the cardinal sin. They start talking about themselves and all the reasons why someone should buy. And all that's doing is raising the aggravation. It's not influencing anybody. What you need to do is bring that cortisol down to a 4 or 5. And how do you do that? By simply caring about the individual and asking about where they're trying to go, what their challenges are. And then when you find that out, just go to the 1 or 2, 3 things that your product or service does and show them how you're going to solve those issues they just discussed with you. And you will have influence over them.
Wow, that seems so simple, man. I mean, caring about the other person, caring about their needs, asking those questions. I mean, how do we get that though
But
quickly
you
on
said
the
it's,
call?
yeah, well, first of all, you said it's simple, right? It is. But look, any stories that we have in our minds, right, is good or bad. If we were young and someone said you'll never amount to anybody, some people use that really strong to motivate them to go and do the best they can. Other people say, "Oh, I'll be a fraud, and I hope no one discovers it." Right? So it doesn't depend what the story is. Understand that every story is emotional fueled. You have to make sure you're dealing with the right emotion. All right. So now all of a sudden you're making a phone call. You're calling a customer. You already got a story in your mind. A story like, oh my God, I better close this deal because I need my quota for this month. Or I really wanted this client. I hope I do it. Oh, I hope this person just likes. Whatever it is, it's a story that you're creating. And that's setting you up for failure because you're already putting yourself in a high cortisol level, which is only going to lead you then to talk more and to try and push someone to accept something that you haven't even created a basis for, right? So what you have to do is first, what we talk about in the book is pause, the art of the pause. Before you make any call, pause and ask yourself, what would success look like if this call went right? Now, and what this will do then, it will get you back onto the track of remembering, hey, I'm here to help this person. Let me find out what the challenges are, and then let me show them how I can help them. That's as simple as it gets. So what you have to do is you have to look and maintain your mindset at all times. And it's the pause that helps you do that before you make any call.
Wow. I dig that. I get that. I see that on the sales calls that I make that I'm involved in when I'm coaching, when I'm training. I absolutely see that folks that take a minute to connect with why am I going to be successful here instead of, oh crap, I got to make another call. Oh boy, I got to make 40 more calls or whatever. I absolutely see that pause
Yeah.
happen. So yeah.
And the biggest thing that I think is the worst advice I ever got when I was in sales many moons, well, I'm in sales every day now too, but the worst advice I ever got was it's a numbers game. Well, okay, it is a numbers game. But if that's all you're doing, you're going to have crappy conversations. Because if you have quality conversations, they take time. So I'd rather have a rep working for me who's maybe doing less calls than a guy who's or a woman who's doing 20 calls, but who's having better conversations, who's then closing faster and closing bigger deals.
Yeah, me too. Me too, right? It's about quality. It's not just about quantity. I mean, certainly there's a base level that we have to hit, but
Right.
we want quality, right? Closed deals is what pays the bills, not phone calls, to be
Right. But
super
you're only going
clear,
to
right?
close it. You see, the psychological process of influence is a process. And if you shortchange it, you'll hurt your cause. You can't shortchange it. So you got to get yourself in the right mindset, find out where someone's trying to go, what they value, and then just talk in that context, and you'll have a better shot of getting what you want faster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Ron, in the book you talk about accountability, and you talk about it in a different way than I've heard. So talk to us about accountability and how that's a cornerstone of the velocity mindset.
So every time I'm brought in by a CEO, the first thing they say to me is, how can I make my people more accountable to the organization? I tell them you can't. I go, why did I bring you in here? I said, that's not accountability. If I make a promise to myself that I'm going to watch what I eat and lose weight, and I don't hold that promise to myself, and I'm the most important person to me in the world, then how can I keep my promises to somebody else? So organizational accountability is nothing more than the sum total of individual accountability. All right. And so what I tell leaders, like managers, but what I like everybody in the world to do is that when something goes wrong, before you blame somebody else and before you blame something else, ask yourself, what could I do differently? That's being accountable. So I'll give you an example. My first sales job was selling copiers in 1980. And I remember it was Royal Business Machines. It was when they came out with the first plain bond copier. No more liquid, no muss, no fuss. and it was very sexy, 15 great crisp copies. And they said, don't worry about the collator and all, it'll come down 6 months. 2 years later, we still didn't have that, only had that one slow machine, although it was great print. And I go knocking on doors, I speak to office managers, and they say, well, are you like the Xerox on the third floor that can collate, slice, and dice? And I go, no. They said, well, come back when you have that. Well, after being kicked out a number of times and blamed my company for not having those machines ready, I decided to go and have a board meeting with me, myself, and I. And I asked myself, what am I really selling? It's not selling a copy. What does a copier do, the outcome? It's a communication vehicle. So maybe instead of, competing against a copy on the third floor that I can't, maybe I need to change the conversation to communications. So I went to my next call and I asked the office manager, would you agree that a copier is nothing more than a communication vehicle? And they said, yes. I said, well, in that respect, what are the challenges you're having right now with your current setup? And I said, oh my God, Alice or Bob on the first floor, they got to make one copy. So by the time they get to the staircase and talk to everybody, they get upstairs, then they got to wait behind all these huge jobs. By the time they come down that one copy, it could be 2 hours at a time. I said, how often does this happen? They said the equivalent of 2 full-time employees. I said, wow, would you like that back? They said, how? I said, I'm not here to compete against that Xerox. What I'm offering you is a machine that gives you great, crisp copies, 15 copies a minute, put one on every floor to do your small jobs, and you'll get that productivity back. I started selling 3 at a time. But you see, the key was I didn't blame my company because they didn't have the other machines, even though they promised that they didn't have it. I still needed to be successful. It was up to me. So I had to change the conversation. And that led for me asking me the central question, what could I have done differently?
Wow, man, I love that. I love that story and I love that lesson. What could I have done differently? And you talk in the book, you talk in the Velocity Mindset about that board meeting with yourself. So let's dig a little deeper into that here before we kind of wrap some of this up, Ron, because I think that's so important. Of all the lessons that you share in the book, the board meeting with yourself is the one that resonated the most with me. So take me through that, step me through how I actually set that up, because I'm sure it's not that complicated, but I'm sure it's super effective.
So the biggest challenge we all fall into, we fall into our to-do list, do task. We're task oriented. And that takes us away from being purpose oriented. We always have to be purpose oriented. So when things are not going well and you want to have that board meeting, the first question you want to ask yourself is, what does success really look like? Forget about my past bias and experiences. What do I really want to generate? Get that clear in your mind. And once you get that clear in your mind, start asking yourself, what task would help? So when I started doing that board meeting, I said, I got to sell. I got to produce X amount regardless of what kind of machines I have. And I said, okay, so what's the conversation you're having right now? They compare me to Xerox. Can you compete? No. What are you going to change? What are you going to do differently? So I started thinking outcomes. And I started saying, that's what I'm selling. We don't sell products or services, Phil. We sell outcomes, the result. So I'm asking myself, what does a copy really do? It's a communication vehicle. So maybe that's the conversation you need to have. And that was the process that I used.
Wow. That is simple, right? But that is super, super different than a lot of us think about, right? We focus on the outcome first, as you're saying here, and then what tasks will help me get there and stay locked into that, right? That's how we get velocity, right? That's how we get there, because that gives us that direction that we need as opposed to just speed. Am I catching your drift here?
Oh, you got that perfectly, because that's it. That's why it's speed with direction. Otherwise, you're going to be task-oriented, doing a lot of things and never getting to the end result. I was task-oriented when I was making all those initial calls. I was doing my job, but I wasn't getting results. So I had to realize, well, hold on a second. I'm doing a lot of speed. I'm doing 20 calls a day, but it's not happening. So what do I need? I need better direction. I need better conversation.
Yeah, better direction. I think that's what a lot of us need, right? We don't need more speed. We need a better, more clear, more exciting direction that we want to head, right? We need a better purpose and a better outcome for us and for those we serve. So as we're doing that, as we're thinking about that, Ron, how do we make sure that we're headed in the right direction so that we get velocity, not just speed?
So anything that you look into, I always say to my clients, start with the end in sight, whether it's a CEO, a salesperson. So let's take a salesperson. What do you want to achieve in, let's say, earnings for the year? And they say $100,000 a year. Okay, great. All right. What has to happen for you to get there? What are the 3 or 4 key things that you can compare against so that you can know in advance, telling the telltale signs, the leading indicators. So we say, well, I need to make the right amount of calls. All right, how many do you need to make? That's one metric. You have to identify the right amount of qualified prospects. How many do you need in a month to get to your number? Because we all know our numbers. So you want to find the 3 or 4 leading indicators that you can measure along the way, knowing that if you have those, success will be will be in your future.
Yeah, I love that. 3 or 4 key indicators. Stay locked into those. Let that guide you towards your direction so you can get velocity. I love that, Ron. I love the book. Congratulations on this.
Thank you.
Now you told me at the beginning here that if folks go to velocitymindset.com early, if they get that done by the 11th of May, that they get something special. So tee it up, Ron. What do we get if we get some time with you here if we pre-order by the 11th?
Sure. So we wanted to bring the concepts live, and bring the words and be live with people so they can really understand it, and be an event so they can understand it. So anybody who goes to velocitymindset.com and you'll click the link to go to Amazon and purchase the copy by May 11th. May 11th is the official release date. Then go back to that site and put your sales receipt number. You will be getting a special invitation to attend a live webinar by me on May 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on the Velocity Mindset. Now, it's only for those people who bought the advanced copies. So you need to go to velocitymindset.com and follow that process. It's very easy. But then you'll not only get the book as soon as it gets released, but you'll also get to have an opportunity to spend an hour with me and some other people and get hearing the concepts from the page jump out and become live and real to you.
Awesome. Well, I know I'm going to go get an additional copy so I can spend another hour with you, Ron. It's a great book, man. I'm really, really excited for you. This is fantastic. I mean, it is exactly what we need now as these times are changing, because we need that right direction. We can't just go fast. We have to go in the right direction. So congratulations, and thanks for spending some time with me, my friend. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Folks, go to the Velocity Mindset. Go to Velocity Mindset, not the Velocity Mindset, velocitymindset.com. Get a copy of this book from Ron Karr. It is fantastic, friends. We covered some of the concepts today about the board meeting with yourself, about accountability, about the power of the pause, and so much more. But it's all in the book. So go get your copy now. velocitymindset.com. Thanks so much, and make it a great day.
You've just gotten the inside scoop on the Inside Sales Show, hosted by Phil Gerbershak. For more content like this, visit InsideSalesShow.com, or to never miss an episode, subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Your mileage may vary. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Don't forget to tip your waitress. See you next time.